This show is brought to you by Safety FM.
Warning, the following broadcast contains adult language, adult content, frank safety discussions, and stories that might sound unbelievable. But believe me, every one of those stories is true. We didn't start the safety war, but we are going to fight to win it. For our families, for our communities, for our workplaces, and for our lives. This is an interview I did earlier this year with Dan Krause, who was at the time chairman of the New Jersey Libertarian Party. His insights on all this health and safety stuff, pretty interesting. I held off on publishing this interview for a whole host of reasons. One of them being timing is very important. I think beginning of this year, nobody's paying attention to politics as much. Now it's October, people are paying attention to politics, and we really don't go into politics on our show per se. I think everybody knows my opinion, knows about my past life in politics and everything else, but we just wanted to go and let everybody know that there are other points of view out there. And my opinion is just one man's opinion, not the station, not anybody else's, is that we run our lives as libertarians. Enjoy our interview with Dan Krause, a man who I am privileged to call a friend. Hello, welcome to Safety Wars. Today we have a special guest here. And a complete disclosure here. Dan Krause has been a friend of mine for going on 15 years, something like that. Closer to 20.
We were both in grad school when we met, for goodness sake.
Yeah. Dan is the state chair for the Libertarian Party in New Jersey. He's been a delegate for the Libertarian Party at the National Convention several times. He's been an activist in Libertarian Party politics. And you're going to say, well, what's he doing here on a safety show? And we've always heard the Democratic view on OSHA compliance and environmental compliance, which is compliance enforcement, right? Generally speaking, compliance enforcement. When the Republicans get elected, it's always seems to be compliance assistance. Not so much on the enforcement end. And that goes back and forth between administrations. Now we're getting into the libertarian philosophy here. Right now on the state and local level, this past November, that's November 2021 and November 2020, there's been a huge surge in libertarian candidates nationwide, mostly concentrated in the middle Atlantic states, with over 300 candidates were elected on some level to whatever they're, Dan and I were talking before the podcast, before this recording, but there's some challenges in and out there with different things, whatever. No, we're not here to talk politics, but what we're talking about is, as I see it, a lot of the pushback we're getting from a lot of the people I have to deal with, mostly construction or environmental cleanup type employees, is I'm hearing the tinge of libertarianism in everything from every direction here. And I'm not a libertarian. I'm approaching this as a independent here, more or less. And in the future, we're going to seek out more people like Dan on the other side to try to balance this thing out. But Dan.
Hi, how you doing?
Enough of an intro. You're like, shut up, Jim.
No,
I remember the speeches you used to give, rambling on and on and on and on.
I personally just want to give a big shout of congratulations to the LP of Pennsylvania, Libertarian Party of Pennsylvania, because they are the lion's share of the local candidates that got elected. Something like 182 got elected this past fall in Pennsylvania. And we actually, nationwide, we used to have a few, but we sitting, but we now have one elected as libertarian. We had a few converts, but elected as libertarian assembly person out in Wyoming. Right. So we actually have people being elected under the libertarian banner to act and to take a part in the creation and elimination of laws as the people need. Jim, you're very right. There's something shifting in the political wings of America. It's interesting to watch, to say the least. But I know this is safety wars, and we're talking about policy. We're talking about how this interacts with
how
work
it
in our
interacts.
lives.
So I'll state the one that I hear, right? The libertarian view, I think everybody hears. But when you start to delve a little bit deeper, it's really not far off, I found, from what we have to deal with in the industry, in the safety industry. So we understand, enough people say the Democrats, one party, okay, they're into regulation and they want to regulate more and more of our lives. Not necessarily true. No, it's cherry picked on what areas they're going to regulate. Then we hear about, on the Republican end, let me turn off this phone, that, they want to go and they want to deregulate. And to a certain point, there has been some deregulation on certain things with the last administration. And now things have gone back where they're reinstituting certain regulations like record keeping, beryllium standard, I believe, is another one. And there's an emphasis on enforcement. So the libertarian, as I understand it, is their whole thing is that private industry should be regulating private industry, self-regulating. Essentially, the industry, it's in their financial, moral hazard, someone would call it also, interest.
You can throw all those buzzwords out there if we wanted.
To have a safe
great
workplace.
Sense, but
and that's great, but companies, not all the time. If companies regulated themselves perfectly, I'd be out of a career. So
that's the thing that a lot of people will mistake. It's
right.
So we're talking about, the word regulation comes up, and when people hear the word regulation and policy, they think law, they think a bureaucratic structure, they think some administrative process, they think an inspector coming in, looking around, making a decision, putting down a fine, putting down a fee,
right,
telling them to stop something, telling them to do something, whatever. But regulation, you really need to shift your mind to the word itself, regulate. And in Spanish, it's the word for law is regulares. It is in English, the word regulate and regular is this sense of just sort of moderation, the thing that is the normal, the thing that is the thing that you live in. When we're thinking about libertarian policy or libertarian bented policy, let's look in contrast to the Democrat or the Republican. The Democrats are characterized, as you said, as someone that's going to, a group of people that's going to come in and over-regulate, but more regulation, whether it's earned or not. And the Republicans are going to come in and deregulate and whatever. And both of them are lying. Okay. The Democrats will always talk about putting more safety standards in place, but in reality, they find that they put in laws that are very, very close to the laws that the Republicans are putting in place. Any actual additional regulations or laws that are put in place, or deregulation or removal laws that are put in place, they're all focused on how the government interacts with the company. And right. They use they hold up the figure of the individual, and we're protecting the worker, or we're protecting the amorphous concept that is the public. So they use these two terms, the worker and the public, to justify what things they put in place for the protection of the public, and by extension the economy or the environment, or the protection of the worker. So what you should be hearing there, if you're listening really closely, is that the people that are being protected, the public and the worker, are not the people that are being interacted with by these laws and regulations. It's the corporations that are being interacted with. The corporations, which are an amorphous social construct, that's right. A legal person, and that's got its own problems. And I have my own severe opinions about whether or not we should have legal personhood for corporations, but that's not an entirely different podcast. These corporations, these legal persons, are the people that actually have the entire say in the safety of the physical people that are working in the plants, and the physical people that are living in the communities, and the physical people that are receiving the products and receiving the benefits and hazards of what's being made in industry. So you have the amorphous blob that is government, right, which is a legal fiction of people coming together into a single entity to take action and have monopoly of force. You got that interacting with the legal fiction of corporate personhood. And you have these two legal fictions interacting with each other. You don't have the physical people, the natural humans having skin in the game here. They're on the receiving end of everything that happens, but they're not the ones that are actually being interacted with in this discussion.
So just to make sure I understand on this, the interaction is between the government and
the companies.
All right. And it's incidental at best that it's the government going and interacting with the people. So
at least in the aggregate, in the general. Yeah.
Right. In the general. So for example, OSHA, right. So under the Federal Occupational Safety and Health Act, they have what's called the General Duty Clause. So the General Duty Clause states that you're an employer. This is not a direct quote, but an employer has to have a safe and healthful workforce, right, free of recognized hazards, right? Real simple. All right. And if there's not an OSHA standard for a hazard, right? OSHA covers thousands of different things. Then they try to go through what's called the General Duty Clause violation. And they have 4 different criteria that they have to meet to prove a General Duty Clause citation. Citation is not a good thing, right? And then everybody ignores further down on the page where the employee is required to comply with all workplace rules that are promulgated under this law, meaning all regulations, everything else. So there's an enforcement mechanism, and it frustrates a lot of employers. There's an enforcement mechanism against the employer, where you have your whole what are called as Code of Federal Regulations 29, which is Department of Labor, Code of Federal Regulations, and you have all different regulations in there. However, there's no mechanism in place to enforce it against the employee, even though, at least on paper or in legal theory, they have the authority from Congress to promulgate regulations on that.
And right there, that's another thing that we need to be aware of and need to be very careful of. This is a concept that's taught in law school, and it's generally not taught to the general public, but it is taught to the lawyers in America, that the end point of any law that is passed is effectively putting someone in jail. So if you are a person that is in violation of some law, oh, it's a fine. Okay, what happens if you don't pay the fine? Okay, you get arrested. What happens if you resist arrest? Well, we see what happens when you resist arrest. So this could be a very simple, oh, here's a $50 fine that you don't want to pay, and it escalates because of some bizarre happenstance. And this is ad absurdum thing. This is taking things to the absurd extreme.
Well, there were a couple of those absurd extremes over the years.
There have been situations. Like George Floyd would be an absurd extreme. This is a guy that was suspected of doing something. I think they suspected of him of, I don't remember what they suspected of him, but during the enforcement of whatever they suspected him of doing, the man ended up being killed in the street. And the same thing happened to so many other people. Just suspicion winds up with, well, we need to enforce whatever law we suspect you of violating, ends up with a physical confrontation and ends up with somebody dead. Any law that you put in place, any regulation you put in place, has the implied use of force behind it.
Right. So how OSHA law, you're talking criminality here.
I'm talking criminality, and I know OSHA law is different, but
yes and no.
If a company does not abide by OSHA, an OSHA regulation, what happens? They get a fine. If they don't pay the fine, they get shut down for a period of time.
And it depends on the severity. So for example, I'm an OSHA outreach trainer. We had this conversation before. In a prior career, you needed some OSHA outreach training, and you're asking questions on it. And basically, let's say that I were to falsify an OSHA outreach card. At that point, it's not that you're in violation of the OSHA per se, but you're in violation of falsifying a government document, which is up to 5 years in federal prison.
Yeah.
Right now, we're seeing with the COVID cards.
Oh, yeah. And people are trying to use as de facto identity cards somehow.
As a de facto work authorization card at this point. So on our network, specifically me and Jay Allen, on the Rated R Safety Show, we one of my first episodes on this, and I was on the Rated R Safety Show, which, by the way, you can every once in a while hear an F-bomb on that show.
I'm doing my best tonight. I'm trying.
Not tonight. But we broke the story on falsified COVID-19 cards being downloadable from the Tennessee Department of Health website. All downloadable in PDF. And it took the mainstream media about a month and a half to 2 months to report on that.
And it's not exactly these things are difficult to create. They're literally, they're one of some of the simplest documents out there. People were literally
some nurses,
using them as environments.
Some nurses in our neighborhood, in the metro New York City area, were just arrested like 3 weeks ago. They made about $1 million. And by the way, people have asked me, hey, Jim, do you have an in on these cards? And no, no, I don't break federal law. No.
It's not a good idea to break federal law if you can avoid it, because prison sucks. No matter what, if you're right or wrong, prison still sucks, So
to bring this back into safety, we
were talking about the libertarian argument of the individual is largely ignored in that it's these two legal fictions that are talking to each other.
Okay, so you're an employer and an employee, right? Under a libertarian scenario, where would it play out? You're an employer and an employee. You have a work relationship. What if you're at work and you get hurt? How would that play out?
Before we get into the discussion, I want to make sure that your listeners understand just what libertarian philosophy is.
Okay, good.
It's not anarchism.
Right.
Anarchism is a point where there is no rulers. There's only people, there are no rulers.
Right.
Libertarianism is the recognition that the state exists. Not that it should exist, but that it does exist. All right, there's a big difference there.
Let me write that down.
And the goal of the Libertarian Project, if you want to use that highfalutin academic sounding phrase, the Libertarian Project, and a lot of the core of the libertarian philosophy surrounds itself with exploring how individuals can be the most free, the most peaceful, and the most prosperous at any point in history, and pursuing the least violent means to do so. We're one of the few philosophies that take into account the fact that there is, in human interaction, there will always be disagreement. There is no utopia. There is no endpoint for the movement. There is only a pursuit of where we are and how we can make our lives more peaceful, more free, and less violent than they are right now. All right, there is place for government inside a libertarian philosophy, but we attempt to find the smallest possible place because we recognize that all governments have a monopoly of violence, and that's a very straight line, uncontroversial philosophical point of view. Government, one of the definitions of government is a monopoly of violence. A monopoly on enforcement is another way to say it. And we are trying to, in our philosophy and our politics, to find ways for society to need as little violence, to have a peaceful and free society as possible. My right to exist and my right to act ends at the point where I'm imposing myself upon you unjustly. Right? Does that make sense?
Yes. Right now I am, so there's two competing safety philosophies out there right now. Right. Always has been, but up until about the last 15 years or so, we've been unable to articulate one side, right? And part of what we do here on Safety FM and on all of our, we have 18 different programs right now, roughly. Last I checked, 18 different programs. We promote one side, which is human and organizational performance. The more traditional safety, and right now I'm going to pause this. Hold on.
Take a pause. Yeah.
Okay, great. So we had to take a little break there because I had something very relevant here that I should have had out immediately. That was not
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing it. I would love
right.
to. But
So
you were asking about what a libertarian safety
right.
program might look like. It would look like contractual agreements between an employer and an employee. That's what it would look like. And a lot of what we do, because that's really in absence the blanket ability to organize that you get under the corporate charter system that exists in the United States on a state by state basis.
Right.
Absent that, it becomes a large structure and web of personal contracts between employers and employees. And because there may or may not be that, that legal fiction of the corporation there, people would be personally liable to their employees if they did something inappropriate, if they put them at risk. I mean, that really is what it is. It's the responsibility. It's the unshielding of persons from the responsibility of people that they put at risk when they are on the job site.
So the traditional view of safety, right, has always been command and control. So you have basically a couple of different things going on. Right, you have behavior-based safety, and this is my view, not so much the network's view, even though a lot of people on the network agree with me. Where it's this adversarial system is eventually what happens. It's command and control adversary. We have rules, you must obey the rules. There are 5 different things that I've identified on this, and not from me, but this is from many different years of research here, a lifetime by some people, right? So traditional safety is the worker is blamed for the safety issues, right? Not the company, the worker. It's an adversarial, right? The worker makes bad choices, right? We've all seen this. Safety is the absence of incidents, accidents, occurrences, mishaps, and everything else. That's more or less you go into a workplace and you worked in
I worked in theater for a long time, so
right.
Really heinous locations and disgusting shops.
Yes, absolutely. You were working as a set designer.
I've been nearly crushed to death a few times. It's
right. And you go in and you see on there, right? We've had 0 accidents, 0 injuries, and 0 illnesses in so many days. Something along those lines. And then you have a reliance on heroic acts and the individual. That means you're relying on a person at the company to run things. You're relying on a person to know everything, not the whole team, not everybody working as a team, but you're relying on one person or a small group of individuals. This is along the lines of somebody calls out for the day, and that's when you're going to have an incident and an accident. I've done 2 fatality investigations where that was the case, where the regular supervisors were out and the replacement guys came in and people ended up getting killed.
That's exactly what happened on one of the situations where I had a collapse on my person. We had built a platform to hold a very heavy item up, and we were in the disassembly phase after the event. And I had observed them teching out, which is we pre-build to make sure everything works because everything's custom. I observed them teching out. I knew how it was supposed to be built. And so I knew that there was supposed to be a knee wall support underneath this platform that I was taking apart. What I wasn't aware of, and this was hour 58 of being awake and on the site.
So you had fatigue management issues.
Yeah, we're talking multiple day fatigue at this point.
Right.
So all the people that had built the thing in the first place had been tasked to go somewhere else on location and to deal with something else that needed to be done. And I and my team was tasked with taking this apart. No big deal. Let's take it apart. There was supposed to be holding one of the platforms up. I thought it was still in place. It appeared to be still in place.
You cut out for a second. Can you repeat that last 5 seconds? Or it's supposed to be
all right. So there was supposed to be a knee wall support to hold up this platform.
Yep.
And I had seen it built, but what I wasn't aware of was that during install, there was a slight irregularity. So they decided, hey, we'll not put that support in. It's strong enough without it. It doesn't need it. So when I went in to take the last bolt out, I was expecting it to rest on a knee wall support that was no longer there. And this 800-pound platform rotated down and pinned was underneath it at the time.
So it landed on top of you.
And itself and the corner of a marble desk that was immobile. And if not for the fact that I'm so damn thin, I would have been pierced by the nails coming through. And if it had gone another 3 inches, I would have been horribly injured, if not killed.
Wow.
It was held by just happenstance. It didn't go any further. Got wedged.
Wow. You lucked out there.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I wound up leaving the industry. At that point, I started to think about, well, how else can I spend my time?
Right. And then you have the other one is the bad actors, number 5, exist and need to be eliminated. So those are the 5 things with traditional safety. You can see it's adversarial. Now, if we move into what's called the new view or safety 2.0, right, it's based around risk, right? So human error is normal. Blame fixes nothing. So with the human error, you have different error modes, and you want to be working in what's called the skills-based mode, which is low attention to task and high familiarity with the task, right? Blame fixes nothing. Learning is vital, right? Meaning most managers don't know what goes on in the field, and our manager is willing to learn what happens in the field. Context drives behavior. My wife and I were just talking about this over dinner with, we're going to be hopefully interviewing somebody who responded to the Miracle on the Hudson plane crash that's in my family, and where you have to look at the whole thing. Why do people do that? Where are the incentives? Where the things go right? And how you respond to failures matters. So if you're going to go out and act like a jerk when there is failure that happens, guess what? You're going to deal with the consequences on that.
Yeah.
And what the idea is with the HOP is that you're getting where you have OSHA regulations, which require you to do X, Y, and Z. This is not a criticism of OSHA, right? I'm just stating as it is. It's the minimum that you need to do in most circumstances. It's not the maximum that you're going to do. And you're going to be going above and beyond what you need. What are the actual hazards? People actually doing the work, getting the person involved, right, in their own working environment, getting the person to work with management, having people work together to try to design the work area so it's safer. This sounds a little bit like libertarianism with me, where you're not going to be relying on a rule book. You're going to be going out and working as a community. You're going to be going out there working with each other, what's going to be safe and everything else. But the thing is, who's assuming the risk? Financially, it's the company. Ultimately, it's the worker.
Yeah. Ultimately, it's that natural person we were talking about at the very beginning.
Right.
When there's an accident, a failure, when someone's injured, it's not a corporation. It's not a legal fiction that's hurt. It's a person that's hurt. And the fact that those people are the ones that are not exactly held into the loop of policymaking should be a little concerning in all of this. There was something you said there that keyed something in. This is going to sound strange coming from a libertarian, but what might be a good frame of reference for how libertarian safety protocols, how safety protocols would be enforced in a libertarian society would be in a ad hoc voluntary workers union, for lack of a better word. Imagine a guild of a certain skilled group of people. Maybe all the workers on the shop floor get together and just work together, come together and have their own agreement on how they're going to operate for safety, kind of thing. They, even outside a regular organization or a formal organization, every group of people that work together have their own shorthand, have their own organizational structure, have their own hierarchy. It happens. Humans are naturally tribal, naturally societal. And we find our niche and our place inside any group of people we're working with. And the concept of ostracization, the concept of shaming, the concept of I don't want to work with that guy or I don't want to work with that girl because they don't do things safely, or that person drives a forklift too fast, I'm going to talk to them. That happens. So in a libertarian society, in a truly libertarian society, people having more responsibility, being exposed to more responsibility for their own well-being and their own existence and their own place in that society, by natural course of the fact that they are human, naturally will take on more responsibility inside that society. It's the fact that we can slough off so much of our own responsibility to another level. Oh, that's not my problem. That's management's problem. Or that's not my problem. I did my job. That guy over there, that's his problem. I don't need to worry about that. When we're able to divest ourselves of the responsibility, that's when things become a problem.
Okay, I don't think I could have said it any better than that. On that, but this is what we try to promote with HOP when managing people. Okay, it's like this. You know what my experience is for the most part. I came up through the environmental consulting field, doing environmental cleanups, things of that nature. In 2004, that's when I started to get involved in more when I left corporate America. And you have to go where the work is. What is the construction, more or less? Managing workplaces. I told you about one of the current projects I'm working on before the call, which is for a major software company slash website that needs safety services.
Which sounds strange, but then you got to remember there are human beings inside these facilities that need to have their health and safety looked after.
Right. So, when I heard the job, I was like, wow, but anyway, I won't go into that. But so so I go out and do an accident investigation on something that I've never done before. What do you need to do? You have to go out there and learn from the experts at doing that job. And normally those experts are going to be the people actually doing the job.
Yeah.
How do you do this job? What's involved in it? I want to learn how to do your job. That sort of thing. Versus you're doing it wrong. Well, okay, I've never done that job. How can I tell you whether or not you're doing it wrong or not?
Yeah.
So you're working with people more, or leadership within the organization, try to build leaders, try to set up the work areas so it's safe. So you have the least amount of errors that could happen. All that goes into that. And I think management has to be able to support a system like that. That's what my clients are now trying to do, is rather than command and control, how do we do this? Maybe if you're not following company policy or procedure, maybe there's something wrong with the policy or procedure. Let's work it from that end. Work as, or what we call work as planned versus work as completed, right?
Yeah, no,
totally
what's that old phrase from Eisenhower? Plans are useless, but planning is essential.
Yes. And the other one, I don't know who said it, was you go to war with the plan from the last war, right? Yeah. And that's basically it. There are some organizations out there, I'm not going to mention which ones, we got phone calls into them right now. Actually emails, we don't call anymore. On more or less they're libertarian, some very conservative organizations. We have some, by the way, I do contact the Democrats and everything. Nobody wants to come on here. So, and the Republicans, you're the first.
Why not? They should be well versed in their own philosophy, unless they're so devoid of philosophical thinking that they can't actually speak about it in any educated way.
So if you're a Republican or Democrat, you want to come on, contact me at jim@safetywars.com. So we'll get you on about this. So basically, government has a role to play, right? But
it has a role to play in our philosophy, in that it's the easiest and simplest way to do a thing. It's not the best. It's the lazy man's out. The hard thing to do is to find a way for society to figure it out on its own, which it's chaotic, it's maddening, it takes time. The easy thing to do is we'll just pass a law and they'll all go away. Well, we have laws against murder and people still get killed. All right. And we also have this sense especially in like environmental hazards. Let's talk about some of the chemicals that we've worked in. It takes time for biology to be understood and the interactions of biology to the chemicals and processes that we're dealing with. RSI was not understood when we were first starting to move into towards the computerized industrial era. The
RSI.
exposures of
What
fumes from lead were not understood.
Right. RSI, define that.
A repetitive stress injury.
Okay.
For example, up until 2020, I was using a mouse and keyboard for multiple hours a day, every single day, and I was doing everything I possibly could to protect my right arm and hand.
Right.
And after 2020, when I switched industries, I haven't done the same level of mouse and computer keyboard work that I used to do as a draftsman and a designer. And it's taken until about a month ago for my arm to actually recover to the point where it no longer throbs on most days.
Lead is one of those things. There's what's amazing is I have this book, Poison in the Pot, right? And they somebody republished it. The book was going for about $35,000 on eBay for whatever reason, and Amazon. Which I said, man, I wish my book was going for that much. But anyway, the hazards of lead were known for thousands of years, just that they were ignored. And they were pretty much unregulated in this country until the mid 1970s.
Well, then you have to talk about also in the same breath, what's worth it? What's worth it? So there was an interview I heard a couple of years ago now, where this was at around the time when people were realizing that estrogen and estrogen related chemicals were leaching out of vinyls. Right. And this is when no BPE stuff was coming out and that kind of, and the water bottles and whatever. And the interviewer was talking about how we just started using these vinyl bags to hold blood, donated blood. And we never tested to see what was leaching out into the blood. We never did that study. And it was a big controversy in this interviewee's mind that we never took that step of figuring out what the consequences of using vinyl to hold blood was. Well, here's the thing with that. You have to imagine everything in balance to what the advantage of to the person doing it in the time is to what their other options were. You can't judge something from an on high, I know the absolute proper thing. In the example of vinyl blood bags, the option was glass. That was the only other option. So we can either use autoclaved glass that's fragile, breaking, and expensive and difficult to manage to hold donated blood. Right. Or we can use vinyl bags that you can literally throw on the floor and stomp on, and it won't damage that precious fluid. And you will save thousands more lives because you've made blood donation easier. And a few years later, we find that BPE is leaching out. Okay, great. So we fixed that problem. But you don't just look at an innovation or a new way of doing things solely on one aspect of safety or one aspect of environmental. There is an entire world of human existence that is surrounding that. Coal miners knew going into the ground was a hazardous. Coal miners knew that there was natural gas, that the black lung was the thing that was happening, that they were guaranteed to have short and brutal lives. But compared to their other options, you cannot take agency away from people. If you take agency away from people, you remove their ability to have any sort of sense of themselves and any ability to actually improve their lives in meaningful ways. If we removed anything that wasn't safe from society, we would no longer be able to act, because the simple act of walking downstairs is dangerous. So many servants in Victorian era died on staircases. It was staggering and led to our modern design of staircases. We no longer have staircases of a certain pitch because it was literally killing people. But it took time for us to realize that that was what was happening, and it was worthwhile to actually change the stairs. It takes society time. It's very easy and fast to pass a law and then enforce it, but it ignores the fact that it takes society time to change. And
so, okay, this is my experience, at least. Company will have a catastrophic situation. It could be a fatality, catastrophic loss. It could be environmental. It could be health and safety.
Mm-hmm. Could be any number of things.
Any number of things. It normally takes, like you said, time takes 3 to 5 years to change a company, the way that they do business.
And that's
if
with
you're gonna
something that's
force it
happened catastrophically.
catastrophically. A worker, I tell you what, for workers, I had to hear it a couple of weeks, about a month ago. I did an accident investigation. We covered it here on the podcast. That was all confidential and everything, as far as I didn't mention names, but the argument I heard against wearing safety toed shoes, right?
They'll cut off your toes if you get hit hard enough.
Yes.
That's the old saw I hear.
That's the old, yeah, and it's always the same story. Always the same story. I have an uncle, grandfather, great grandfather at this point, guy down the street, his relative distant. They were working. It's usually either a shipyard or a logging industry or some other industry where there were huge amounts of weight. All right. And huge amounts of weight are usually like 20, 30, 40,000 pounds. They're dropped from 6 stories on a crane, from a crane, or a skid row out there in logging industry, and it hit their foot. If it weren't for that steel toe, they'd still have their toes.
Like, yeah, sure. It's not the 20-ton piece of lumber that took that. It's the piece of steel toe that did it.
Right. And remember, they're only rated for so much. They're rated for so many joules. So it's, it is what, it is what it is. And you're still hearing this. And you have that. How long they've been rated steel toes? Probably around 55, 60 years, somewhere in that range. And you still hear this. So it takes a long time. Same thing with the COVID, with the precautions for COVID, whether you agree with the mask or not, or other procedures or not, it takes a long time. The other thing
we had a conversation in the very beginning about like the appropriateness of masks and coming down to the size of the particulates.
Right.
Because certain masks have different filtering sizes. They're able to take care of certain particulates, and all of it is useless for me because I got this here beard on.
Right.
And if I'm wearing a beard,
you got a very good beard, by the way. Your listeners can't see that. Dan's got a face, not for radio. I have a face for radio. He's good. He could be on TV.
But yeah, we can have the N95 or N98 and have that on. But if you are a man and you have facial hair, that rating goes right out the window. With the COVID-19 protocols, I'll speak specifically about the Libertarian Party at this point, as opposed to philosophy. The position of the Libertarian Party throughout, and we are very fractured as a party because each state is a separate affiliate and has its own way of doing things. The National Party has very little control over its state affiliates, and we like it that way. We like fractured power. That's a thing with us. We like fractured power. We like societal solutions as opposed to governed solutions. Largely speaking, the Libertarian Party's position has been, we have a environmental hazard. This is a disease. We should find out what we possibly can scientifically to reduce harm and spread, and then educate people and convince people to go along with those best practices. And as those best practices change, we should make sure we continuously educate people so that we are always working with the best information. We saw from our governments that they get a single idea of how they want to do things, and they spend so long berating everybody that does not go along with them, whether they're right or wrong, that it becomes moral necessity to abide by that first idea, whether it's right or wrong.
Well, we have a different way of handling that with HOP, right? And it's very congruent to what you're doing here. Parallels it, all right, what you just said. We believe safety is misdefined, all right? Zero accidents, zero illnesses, and everything else has been the philosophy of safety, going on traditional philosophy.
It's a wonderful goal.
Wonderful goal. DOT just came out with that goal just now in the infrastructure bill that was just signed, and it's we did a program on that. That's but anyway, Rather than zero, we're going to because then if you fail at getting zero, you have a unsafe working environment.
Yeah, it's a very binary
We're
thing.
going to add. What is it? Safety is not the absence of error of instance, but presence of some type of safeguard. I hate to use the word control, but because that's negative, but a safeguard of some
It's
sort.
an appropriate English word. Just
right. Yeah. So, for example, you have with the COVID, you have a lot of different safeguards thrown in there. Whether or not you agree with vaccinations, but you have the vaccinations. You have the and we only recommend here NIOSH rated filtering face use respirators or other things appropriate. We don't recommend face coverings like the government was doing. We recommend the actual stuff, right? There's social distancing. You have now the test kits. You have that are widely available. We're getting 4 every 2 weeks for our children through the school district. We are we have our medical system with people, right? Treatments and all that other stuff and everything else. And you add more and more controls to your situation, you're less likely of having COVID. Yeah. And the thing with that type of approach is you can eliminate any one of those things, and you're not going to have a catastrophic loss.
You're avoiding a single point of failure in your system.
Exactly.
I mean, but speaking of single point of failure, I would be remiss if we're talking about policy and safety. I would be remiss if I did not tut at the FDA for its early response to COVID, because in the early 2020, late 2019, we were starting to understand what the heck this SARS-like disease that was existing in Wuhan was. We were puzzled as to what it was coming out, and the general public knew it was coming because the world is a global entity at this point. If you have a cough in Tanzania, someone else is getting sick in Uganda. There's very little to stop a disease from spreading in a globalized society. And while our former president was talking about how it's not here yet, the general public was very aware that it was coming. Now, the FDA at the time had very strict controls, and I'm pretty sure these controls are still in place. I don't know if they've changed them yet. They should, on approving medical tests for clinical use.
Right.
So there were virology labs and genetic sequencing labs that were getting copies of the DNA that had been sequenced in China and elsewhere, and figuring out and creating the first prototype tests to run. And they were actually in the very beginning, they were accepting samples from hospitals to test to see if this person was experiencing COVID, and the FDA was stopping them from using it for clinical use. They were being restricted to experimental use only. You can't use this for clinical, even though it worked. And we're talking about months here. And they actually developed and certified to work tests from being used in the United States until they went through a very Byzantine, elaborate process, including mailing by US Postal Service, physical mailing of a CD-ROM to a specific address so that it could be reviewed and processed through the FDA's infrastructure. So these very same tests that were being denied used by the general American public because of the FDA's regulations that were put in place with the very best of intentions, I'm sure. These tests were being sold to Japan and Korea.
Wow.
And they were being used by the general public of Japan and Korea. And because they had the tests that were developed in America and with American partners that we were not permitted to use for our testing in the first couple of months of the COVID, Japan and Korea had some of the best outcomes of prevention of the initial spread because they had the testing. And we were, by law, being prevented from doing it. It's not that laws are bad. It's that law is unthinking. It doesn't have a human element. It is a concept. It is a truth that must be obeyed. Human experience is not unthinking, unchanging, written in stone. Human experience is different. It is important to have rule of law. It is vital that we have rule of law in the Republic, but we must always have the rule of law tempered by justice. Justice is different from rule of law. They're friends, They're colleagues, they're cousins.
Yeah, I'm going to go and cut that, and that's going to be the promo for that. I don't know how else to say that better, and I think we should just say that. And back to the pandemic, where we were talking about this back in the mid 2000s. This was coming. I worked on so many different projects, and the amount of research I did back in those days when I published my first book, which is it's unavailable now, on nuclear terrorism. We knew this was all.
I actually read that. I proofread that for you. That was fun.
You did. And in 2010, right, Congress stopped with the pandemic preparedness stuff. It wasn't funded anymore, and that was after we told them. And there were certain politicians in New Jersey that knew this, that are still in office today, that are acting like it, and they're in leadership positions. All right.
I'm shocked to find gambling in this establishment, Jim.
Yes, I know. Well, what's funny is I recently met somebody from Casablanca, and that's our inside joke. I said, "Is there gambling in Casablanca?" She says, "Yes, there is. They got all different kinds of Casablanca." So, anyway, I digress. So, Dan, someone wants to talk to you. Find out more about libertarian philosophy. Wants to contact Dan Krause. We're speaking to Dan Krause. There's the state chair of the Libertarian Party of New Jersey. How do they go about finding out more about what you're saying and everything else?
Well, I am an elected official of the state party, so I'm going to put that information out there. You can find the Libertarian Party of New Jersey at NJLP.org. You can always reach the currently serving chair of the party, which I am currently, at chair@njlp.org.
Can you spell that, please?
CHAIR at NJLP.org. And you can find out more information about the Libertarian Party in general by going to LP.org. Now, the philosophy is trying to nail down a philosophy is like trying to nail water to a wall. So go ahead and start reading. Libertarianism.org is a good place to start. But if you want to read a little Locke, little Adam Smith, a lot of economics, a lot of philosophy, a lot of legal. It's a broad-ranging philosophy, and it is separate, but also coterminous with the party. The party is trying to bring the philosophy to life. The philosophy itself is always developing.
Dan, thank you for joining us here on Safety Wars, and we'll have this up in the next week or so.
Thank you very much, Jim. It was a pleasure.
Take care.
Well, that was a very interesting conversation there. It turns out that we have more in common than we don't. Something to think about, especially when we are dealing with people and dealing with the tumultuous times we're dealing with in our country. For Safety Wars, this is Jim Posel.
The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the host and its guest and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the company. Examples of analysis discussed within this podcast are only examples. They should not be utilized in the real world as the only solution available, as they are based only on very limited and dated open source information. Assumptions made within this analysis are not reflective of the position of the company. No part of this podcast may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, mechanical, electronic, recording, or otherwise, without prior written permission of the creator of the podcast, Jay Allen.